All right, I'd like to thank you guys for coming in and doing a discussion for U.S. history class here at Michigan Center. To start off in this session, I want to ask you guys a few questions from your experiences in the Vietnam War and also just that era in American history, and kind of pick your brains, and whatever you have to throw in on it or contribute will be great, and anybody's welcome to field these questions. So first up, let's just start with a few questions from this era in American history. One of the things we had covered recently in class was the Kennedy assassination. And I had said to the students that, it seems like once in a generation, there is some epic event that happens where it seems like time stops and everybody remembers where they were at, what they were doing when they heard news of it. I've talked about Pearl Harbor being that for my grandparents, for the 9/11 attacks kind of in my life. And I think the Kennedy assassination was an event like that when you guys were young adults. Could any of you talk on the Kennedy assassination in general and just what you were doing when you heard news of it, that tragic event?
Well, for me, I knew exactly where I was. I had been a football player. I had dislocated my shoulder 9 times during the football season. And that morning, I was having my surgery to get my shoulder repaired. So I'm coming out of the anesthesia about early in the afternoon. And when I'm starting to come to and get my senses about me, I heard a bunch of crying in the room. And I'm looking around and thinking, oh, geez, they're crying about me. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, it was on the news that the Kennedy had been assassinated. So, and I didn't know anything about it until one of the medical staff told me what was going on. And I was still a little bit fuzzy, but I do remember that because, like I say, I was just coming out of surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was in school. I think it was 11th grade. They came out and announced it over the school PA system. And back then we had TVs in the classrooms for closed circuit training. And they put it on the TV circuit and so forth so we could find out what was going on. But yeah, it was shocking for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay. At this era in American history that we've been covering, kind of the early 1960s is what we've just finished in class. The civil rights movement was really heating up, and there was a lot of racial tensions in the country. And we had talked about how the Korean War was the first war where the U.S. military was fully integrated. So that would have been the integration policy would have been fully in effect by the time you guys were serving in the Vietnam War. Did you have any experiences as far as just any thoughts on the civil rights movement in general, or about did you have any comrades in arms, any other soldiers with you that were minority groups, Latino or African American? Any thoughts or experiences you could share there?
Well, we knew that there was a lot of racial tension going on at that time. Once I got to the military, I came from an all-white school. I had very, very few minorities that I ever, had any association with. Once I got over to Vietnam, we had quite a high number of minorities. We had a lot of blacks and quite a few Hispanics. And there was never any racial tension among any of us. We were all brothers in arms, and we had each other's backs. And there was my time in the military. We were all brothers. I didn't experience any of the racial tension at all.
Mm-hmm.
We were on the river boats. We had anywhere from a 5-man to a 12-man crew on the boats. And one of the most important things was you learned to depend on the other person. It didn't matter who he was or what he was, that you just depended on him, like Mike was saying, to protect your back, to work together. When you had a downtime, and sometimes little groups would form, not dramatic groups, but I think of the term birds of like feather flock together.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would get together and socialize because they had common interests. And I had no problem with that. Mm-hmm. But we depended on each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a couple of guys that were African American. In fact, we had one guy, he was from Louisiana, and they would kind of go at each other,
mm-hmm.
All in friendship. Yeah. And it was just hilarious just to listen. They'd be hollering back and forth across the barracks, teasing each other. Mm-hmm. But we got along real great. Yeah. No problems at all.
Good camaraderie.
Yeah, can I say, I grew up in Canada, and we never had any kind of racial problems growing up as a kid. And in fact, when I was in school, I hung around with African American, and we were great buddies.
Mm-hmm.
So and that, I mean, people that didn't have any in school.
Mm-hmm.
We did.
Good stories. I think, a lot of times we, looking back on history, focus on so much of the negativity and the bad events that it's good to hear positive experiences like that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing. Now, the Vietnam War was kind of taking place at the height of the Cold War. Tensions are high with the Soviet Union and the communist world, and the whole point of the Vietnam War was to stop the spread of communism into South Vietnam. What were your views on just communism in general back from this time period in history?
The idea of communism is that they were wanted to run the people as well as not just a country, but they took your property and everything that you had. And we didn't want that. Growing up in Canada, we didn't want it over there as well. So we were in the same boat. So it was, we either fight communism here or we fight it in another country where it's at and we stop it there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the reason why we went over there, because those people didn't want to be under the communist regime like North South Korea. They're still North and South. And that's what they wanted right there. That's the main purpose for us being there. But it didn't quite turn out that way.
Right. Yes. And we've done in class, we kind of compare and contrast Korea and Vietnam and how both wars kind of had a similar intention, but they played out very differently. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that was probably really common and how most Americans feel from what I know of that time in history. Yeah.
And they're also not looking at Vietnam as a war. They're looking at it as a conflict. Let's say what it is.
Yeah.
But they're one of those word things.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Now,
I think to really understand Vietnam and communism, you need to stop and think about Ho Chi Minh and his involvement in that. Ho Chi Minh had done a lot of studying up in China. He was a very educated man, quite intelligent. His passion was to have Vietnam united. And his concept was that communism would be the best answer for Vietnam as a united North and South. So many people pictured him as a dictator, as a vicious person, but really he was a political activist that just wanted to join the country together. And then the people in the South had a different opinion. They wanted their democracy, and so that's when the conflict began. But so I guess you kind of need that picture in your mind to understand it.
All right. Really speaks to that, the policy of containing it where it's at. That was kind of the U.S. perspective to stop it from spreading. Yeah. Now, the Vietnam War I've talked about in class is unlike a lot of the previous conflicts in American history, because this one, as the war drug on, became more controversial, and you had the anti-war movement really kind of picked up steam, and it became something that really divided the country. Do you have any thoughts or experiences from just your personal lives in your experiences in dealing with the anti-war movement or anti-war protesters? Did you see much of that or not really have much experience with it? Did you feel pretty supported by, the people back home?
We were pretty isolated where we were. We didn't have any newscasts or anything like that we could keep informed of what was happening back here in the States. I think, though, that a lot of the people who were protesting and stuff back then were looking at the political issues. They felt that the war was unjust, that it was unnecessary, it was a cost of lives, and they didn't want to go and spend their life doing it or risking their life or have their family members and loved ones doing it. And so they were protesting that, they had their right to do that. I think many people missed out on an opportunity of serving their country because of that. And it did cause a lot of division in the country, a lot of problems with law enforcement, a whole basket of problems along with it. But I think we have to respect, our country stands for the right to peacefully protest. I think we have to remember that.
Now, to sum up the Vietnam War, we haven't finished it in class yet, but essentially our goals were not achieved. When America leaves, the whole country does unify and become a communist state. Do you have any thoughts on how the war could have been handled better?
Well, our hands were tied basically by a political interest. When we actually started to go over there, we were limited as to where we could attack. We couldn't bomb the north in certain areas. They were so afraid that if we went in and started bombing like places where civilians would get injured, that the Russians and the Chinese would get involved on the North Vietnamese side, and we could end up with World War III. So we were very limited into our targets that we could go after. One of the first things that I was told when I got there is we got into a firefight one afternoon, and we could not fire back until we radioed in and got permission to fire back. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? What did I get myself into? But that's kind of what it was. Our hands were basically tied, and it was all for political reasons.
Too much, politics, and I think that separates it and is a contrasting point from, say, a World War II to Vietnam. Moving on to your experiences during the war, did you have any experiences with South Vietnamese civilians, with the population there, or was there any culture shock going over there from America? Anything you could share with us on that?
I think one of the comments that you would get from most of the guys, when you entered the country and got off the plane, it was the smell. It was a very decaying smell of the jungle. Just a real pungent smell to your nose. But, and this went out throughout the country, not just at the airport there or whatever. As far as interaction with some of the Vietnamese, we had Vietnamese trainees on our boats, and we were actually training them to take over our equipment and to use it after we left. We had many opportunities to interact with them. As one of the guys was saying earlier, I like to eat, and so I talked one of the Vietnamese into taking me into one of the villages when we pulled up by the river one day, and take me in town and give me a real Vietnamese meal. And we did. And we went over, and the Mamazan was cooking the meal over in the corner on a campfire. And they kind of looked at it like, what are you doing here? But there's times like that. And I think one of the important things, I don't care if you're going on vacation or in a war, is you need to interact a little bit with the culture and be sensitive to the culture that you're in at that time.
While you were over there, would you say, did you get to know any Vietnamese people well, or did you make any friends, or was your contact fairly limited and just experiences like that, like in maybe having a meal or something, or did you actually have conversations and get to know any of them?
On a personal basis, no. I think one of the things is, thinking about it, you don't really build relationships when you're in a war. I know one day we were down below our gun mounts, and we were sitting right next to each other. And our conversation with a fellow Navy guy was, if we don't make it out of here today, we'll see you upstairs. Yeah. And so you don't build relationships, because if somebody gets hurt or killed or sent away or whatever happens, you just don't want to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I dealt with them quite a bit with our medical CAPS, what we call civic action programs. We'd go into the villages, and every time we showed up there, we would be mobbed by the kids. They loved us because we would bring them sea ratchets that we would trade them. We would give them candy bars, and we would actually take care of their infections because they have very limited access to any medical care. So we would get a large turnout, and we were thought as very positive influence in the villages area. So every time we showed up, the civilians would really appreciate us coming in there, and it was a joy kind of to see the kids, how they really appreciated us. They called us number one Boxy, number one being good. If you were not, like, it was number 10 or number 10,000, but we were always number one. But we always had a good relationship with the civilians over there. But like I say, you never get to have that much contact with them where much about them. But it was kind of fun and interesting to go in the village and get the nice reception.
Did very many of them speak English, or was there the language barrier too?
Pretty much. We always had interpreters with us, especially because if they wanted to explain what was wrong medically with them, we had to have interpreters to tell us. Mm-hmm. But they picked up some pidgin English, and we picked up a few phrases. But I think Vietnamese is a very hard language to learn. They seem to pick up our language easier, but there always was a gap on the communication.
Could you explain the difference to our students between the VC or the Viet Cong and the NVA, and maybe sum up any experiences you had or conflicts, combat that you had or guys around you had with one group or the other, and the differences?
Well, the VC were like the local villagers. They would be, villager and work, or maybe around the bases in the daytime. In the nighttime, they would get their black pajamas on, and they would be the enemy. They would sneak into the villages. They would take rice and different things away from the civilians and use it against you. And they always wore either black pajamas or whatever the locals would wear, and you couldn't tell if they were friend or enemy. The NVA basically had uniforms like we did, and they operated in large numbers, where the Viet Cong in small numbers. So when you got attacked by the Viet Cong, it was usually like guerrilla tactics. When you wanted to go after the NVA, you better be prepared to take large numbers of Americans, because it was going to be a set piece battle. Not more like what World War II was, where you have one big unit opposing another one. With the Viet Cong, it was like small unit tactics, and they were both very effective. And I was on like 9 different operations, and sometimes you get a combination of both. But they were very well trained and very well equipped.
Could you say percentage-wise, just a ballpark guess, for your unit and other units that maybe you were close with or serving nearby, was most of the fighting between Americans and the VC, or was more of it with the NVA?
With our unit, it was mostly with the Viet Cong. Mm-hmm. We were stationed in an area just a little bit southwest of Da Nang, and it was considered to be the rocket belt. It was just in range for the rockets to hit the air base in Da Nang. And our assignment was to patrol, search, and destroy any of the rockets that we discovered in that area. And basically, it was also the heaviest booby-trapped area in the whole country. We had so many guys that lost their limbs because of booby traps. And instead of having large numbers of troops, fighting you were actually, hurting yourself by making these patrols and tripping these booby traps. So that was kind of the Viet Cong strategy, was fewer numbers but more booby traps. So that was a big challenge for us.
Follow-up question to that: were booby traps very common? Is that something you guys and other men that are serving in your units, did you experience that a lot? Did you see guys that had fallen into bungee traps or anything of the like?
Yeah, in the area we were in, we had the highest number of amputees during that time that we spent there, and they actually sent down an investigation team to find out why we were losing so many guys to these booby traps. And after investigation, they found out that the area that we patrolled was the heaviest booby trapped area in the whole country, and it was nicknamed Booby Trap Valley. So after we were there, probably 3 or 4 months, because the morale was starting to really go down, nobody wanted to go on patrol anymore. So they rotated us out to another area just to give us a break. But yeah, many booby traps.
Yeah,
it's also part of your training and infantry training for watching out for booby traps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine that would come in pretty handy. With the style war that was, and that's something that I think is contrasts Vietnam to, say, my grandfather's experience in World War II. They weren't really dealing with booby traps and stuff at any large scale in World War II or Korea or World War I. So now
We dealt mostly with the Viet Cong. In our situation, we'd be going down the rivers, and they would pass the word from village to village that we were coming down that river. They had a good communication system. Somehow they communicated, and they would have somebody waiting just to ambush us at different points. And if we were now picture we were going down a river that maybe is 150 feet at the most, sometimes down to 50 feet across it, and they are using rocket propelled grenades, which are what they use on army tanks, to give you an idea of what it is. They penetrate 11 inches of steel, and so they would have a hole along the river, and they would get up and shoot that RPG at us, and then duck down the hole so they couldn't be shot. So that's kind of the concept of what the Viet Cong were doing with us. Just maybe one or two people out there in that area. Sneak attack.
In regards to the riverboats, could you explain to our students what napalm was and how that was used and what its purpose was?
Okay, napalm is a fiery gel. I guess I could best describe it. I'm going to use the term Vaseline petroleum jelly. And if you took and mixed that with, say, like gasoline or kerosene or something like that, and mix it together, and then you shoot it out in a solid stream, and ignite that stream like a big Zippo lighter. And then when it gets out there, it sticks to anything it can, and immediately incinerates it. So it was used a lot along the brush, along the banks, to clear the brush back so that we could see the enemy. And unfortunately, sometimes it was used as a return fire tool, because, like I said earlier, they would go down in the holes. The Vaseline, the napalm would go down into the holes where they were too. It was not a preferred weapon to use, but it was there.
For students that are interested in that in a visual, I will include quite a few different videos that these guys shared with me, and some other that I found on YouTube, where you'll get a good visual of what napalm looks like, and through some government or military videos. So
one of the effects of napalm also is that there were a lot of tunnels where the enemy could hide. But once the napalm would burn, it would create carbon monoxide. So when the air started to go back into the tunnels, they would be breathing in carbon monoxide. So if you didn't, get them on the surface, the carbon monoxide would kill them in the tunnels. So it was a multi-purpose type of weapon.
Yep. Now, I think in general, warfare is marked by a lot of traumatic experiences, and we've talked about in class PTSD, or post-traumatic stress. And I don't think we had discussed how that was not well understood in World War I. And, over the last 100 years, it has been understood better, and there's more treatments. Are you comfortable talking about maybe any traumatic experiences you saw, or that other friends of yours experienced, and to what extent you feel you were affected by PTSD, or other guys and if you think it was worse in Vietnam opposed to previous wars?
That's a good question. Yeah, there was a lot of things that, being a corpsman, I had to take care of the amputees and sort of thing. The one thing that really sticks with me is during one of the operations, we had our allies, the South Vietnamese Army. We had a large helicopter assault, and one of their choppers got shot down and crashed and burned. And once the burning stopped and we were able to go in and retrieve the bodies, we had to go in there and take out those burnt bodies. And talk about the smell of burnt flesh. You'll never forget that smell. And we had to take them out.
No, that's all right. That's something I talked about in class, I'll show a lot of movie clips, YouTube, to try to give kids a primary source and just kind of a real feel for what warfare is like. But one thing I know I've said, and I think it's worth repeating, you don't get smells or things like
No.
that. It's not like seeing it in person, and I wouldn't know either. I have no combat experience and not a veteran, but I think that makes it much more intense and real than just viewing it in a movie or on some camera footage. So.
Yeah, just the sight of having to go in there and take them out. We take one body out, and then you would basically go and lose your cookies, go back in, and you got them all. And the bodies were kind of burnt in the position that they landed. So in order to put them in a body bag, you had to straighten them out. So you're getting all these people that are crumpled up. You had to straighten the bodies out, and there's nothing there really but sinew and bone. Mm-hmm. And when you try to straighten them out, you just hear the crack, snapple, and pop. You put them in the bag and ship them out there, and that's just an image I'll never forget.
I would imagine that would stay with you your whole life. Yeah.
I think PTSD also, you have to stop and think that in our situation, we never had a downtime. We lived on the boats 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We were ready to go at a moment's notice. I think of one particular time that we were taking Army troops out, and we took our boats and we just put them up on the bow up on the beach, and we were waiting for the Army troops to make their sweep around the area, and we were mortared that night. I had two of the guys on the boat that were with me. We sent both them out on helicopters. I lost my hearing when the mortar hit. Some of those things you don't forget. The loud noises, the smell of smoke. But the trauma of just continually dealing with a tense situation is sometimes quite hard to deal with.
Weighs on you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I know that's not easy, talking about that kind of stuff. Moving into modern day a little bit, today there's American soldiers stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those wars have become, I think, to say the least, controversial too. There's a lot of mixed feelings on whether America should go in and try to influence other places in the world, if we should be proactive in our foreign policy or more isolationist and not do that. What lessons do you think could be taken from the Vietnam War? What lessons have we learned? What lessons did we maybe not learn? Any comments there?
I think maybe one of the lessons we did not learn is we try and win the war by politics. I think we need, when we send the troops in, we need to let the troops do the job that they're trained to do. I see from the Gulf War, for example, they got right up to like Baghdad and they stopped and they turned around and came back. We had to go back later and redo the whole job again and take over Baghdad. I see in Afghanistan right now, they're trying to have a troop withdrawal. And I think that to turn this whole battle over to the local people, I think it's gonna fail. And so I think that's in the long run, we're going to look at it and say, what did we accomplish? Mm-hmm. And I think the policies that were restricting us too much during the war. I remember, like Mike was talking earlier, we were out on the rivers on patrol. We were shot at, but the politicians said that day you can only use M16s. We had all these weapons on the boat. We could only use M16s because they were negotiating or something that day. I don't think we've learned our lesson from that.
I think that'd be very frustrating. Yeah. So what would your take be? And I think your opinion matters a lot more than my opinion because you guys have combat experience and served in a war. Would you say, just as veterans, as guys that have experienced trauma and seen the dark side of war, should America be proactive and intervene in places around the world? Or do you think that should be avoided at all costs and often the cost is too high for our American servicemen? Do you have any take on that?
I think we hear a term human rights many times. And I think As a nation, we have a responsibility to protect human rights of those people that cannot protect themselves. And I think that's kind of why we were in Vietnam, is to help them to protect themselves. Right now, we have all these people coming into our country as immigrants trying to flee oppression in their countries. And it's a hard call to make, because I don't think we need to be the world's policeman, but I think that we need to be sensitive to people that are deeply in need. And we should show a strength and a force, but sometimes war is not always the answer.
Well said. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Now, just in regards to growing up a generation or two back, in regards to when you were teenagers in high school or in your young adult years, what would you say is better about America and the world in general and just life? What's worse? What's your 2 cents there?
It seems like we're kind of repeating history. Back when we were, growing up and getting ready to go in the military, the race wars kind of were going on. A lot of strife, a lot of protests. Detroit, 67 and 68. They basically burned down Detroit, and it seems like 50 years later, it seems like there's riots all over the place. If somebody doesn't like what the police did, or they're going to go burn down Minneapolis and all these other places. It seems like we've come full circle in the last 50 years. It doesn't seem like we made much progress in the political, things out. It seems like racism is still as deep today as it is back then. So I'm not seeing where we made any improvements in that area. So I don't know what the answer is, but we seem to be repeating history instead of learning from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
As you look around the country, you see flagpoles with a black and white flag on it, called the POW flag, prisoners of war. And we fly that flag because we're honoring those that served their country, and some of them never were found or came back for some reason. I look at some of the other countries, and they don't have that respect for life that we do. And now as I drive around the Jackson area, I look at the attitude of many of the people as they're driving, as they're interacting in town, and I see kind of a lack of respect for the other person. And that's one of the things that we saw as a negative thing in countries that we were opposing, is they didn't have any respect for life or for other people. And unfortunately, I think as a country, we have lost some of that respect, learning to respect each other. I know when I was growing up, I could go out and walk around the street. I could be gone all day long, and my parents didn't worry about it. And today, you just don't feel comfortable doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at points in the 1960s, there was a big rift and a gap in society. And I don't think, I think back to when I was growing up in the 90s, it was always there, but maybe not to that extreme. But I feel like going to the history is cyclical point and what your comments there, I feel like we're as divided now as we have been at almost any point in American history. Do you think, are there any solutions to that? What would be your advice on, is there anything that could be done to kind of restore a common sense of respect and spirit of, just, Americanness and unity?
I think when we have our own opinion about a certain matter, that somebody may not agree with that, well, that's fine, but you should be able to go away still as friends or whatever without getting into a squabble. And that's what's happening today, is that they don't respect the other person's opinion. It's only theirs that counts. Well, it's not so. That's not what our country was founded on.
Agreed. And that's something I talk about in class and try to encourage in class discussions. I often play devil's advocate and will argue the opposite of what any kid maybe is arguing in class. But one thing I try to emphasize is we all leave respecting each other and
Right.
don't take hard feelings away from it, that it is okay to have differences of opinion, yet still be,
Yeah.
friends with each other and have a
That
respect
goes right
and
back
decency.
to where you have freedom of speech. You should respect the other person's. You might not agree with them, but at least respect them and listen to their thoughts, and don't start a fight over it.
Yeah.
Right. Agreed.
I think it goes back to our family core. Um, Unfortunately, nowadays you see that a lot of the young people do not have respect for their parents. When they're asked or commanded to do something, they can just say, "I'm not doing it." So I think we need to rebuild the families and the respect within the love within the families. I think that would be our first approach on it.
I think that's wise advice
Very
there,
wise.
and I absolutely agree with that. Okay, last question for you guys, and this is a big one. Most of the students that are watching this video are freshmen or sophomores in high school. They're not too far away from adulthood and graduating and getting on with their life. What would be the best piece of just life advice, little tidbits that you could throw their way, and some wisdom you could share with them?
Enjoy your teenage years because they can go by pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
As we get older, myself anyway, life is getting shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So just enjoy it. And if people keep stressing college, for instance, you may not be college material. There are other jobs, small shops that machinist, lumber, carpenters. Everybody's into that, and you can do just about anything you want. And I think one of the things that we got away from when I was in school is having shop classes. We had tailor shop. We made shoes. We had sheet metal. We had mechanic shop and woodworking. And today we even had art class. But in today's classes, we don't have anything except to go over here to college, to career. But if you're not college, if you don't plan on going to college, get into the career center and pick up a trade and be all set when you get out of high school.
I think that's really good advice, that whatever you do, you need to find some meaning and purpose in whatever career path or life path you choose. And college can be a great option for a lot of people, but it's not the only option. There's a whole lot of good paths and probably a whole lot of bad paths out there. So
My oldest son, thinking of him, we were having a discussion one time and about if he couldn't be a police officer. That I said, son, what would you really like to do if you can't be a cop? What would you like to do? So he started thinking about it. And he thought, I'd like to computers. So he got into computers for a bit. And that worked out. He's pretty computer savvy now. But that's not what he did. He was Army a career out of it. But he didn't go to college. He went to college.
Mhm.
That's why he went to service, because he didn't want to go to college.
Sure, find something that interests you and then pursue that.
Yeah,
So.
he's got a college degree now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after 20-some years in the service.
Mm-hmm.
He's got his degree. When he gets out, he'll find something that he'll want to do.
Was he able to pay for his, because I know the cost of college, something I've talked about in class, has gone through the roof over the past couple decades. Was he able to get that degree paid for? Did he have to take out debt for it, or?
No, it was all paid for. He didn't take out any debt. It was all paid for through the military. And that's one thing. If a kid wants to go to college, if he can't afford it, go into the service. I think it's a great experience. You'll come out with discipline and it really helped you get through college.
And financially, it can set you up better too.
Yeah.
That's one thing I know my students will probably, this is something I'm repeating. I've said to them before, but I think it's worth repeating, that be real wary of saddling yourself with a lot of debt young in life. Find a path where you can do something you want to do without taking on tremendous amounts of debt really early on.
The military actually is a very good option if you're not having a general direction that you want to go, because there were so many different certifications you can get in the service. There's so many technical jobs going on now, computers, hands-on type of stuff. And once you get that training, it will do you well when you want to apply out in civilian life, because a lot of businesses will give preference to any military experience that you've had, because you've had the discipline. They know that you're hardworking, you're accomplished, and you're doing a good job. So it's a good thing on your resume. And also, like he was saying, you could get your education paid for. And if you like it well enough and have a career, you can retire at a young age, say 38, 39 years old. You get a full pension, and then you can basically, get part-time jobs and still make a decent living. So it's a good option, very good option.
Agreed.
Hindsight's always a good thing. But as many of these students are trying to make decisions right now on what they're going to do for the rest of their life, I guess I would say you're probably not going to make a decision right now where you're going to be 40 or 50 years from now. You're going to find that different events in your life bring you different directions.
Yeah.
I know I was in, after I got out of the service, I was in like construction and so forth. And I decided I wanted to try a desk job. And so I got this desk job, applied for it, and it was the most miserable time of my life. And I decided that was not it. So I quit there, went back into construction. My point is, failure sometimes is not always bad. Sometimes we learn from it, and it shows us different directions and things that we'd like to do and don't do. So if you get into something that you fail at, don't let it crush your life. Just move in a different direction and keep on going.
Exactly.
And I've found that everything I've done in my life has always brought me back to my main objective that I had years ago, that I had a general idea where I wanted to go. So everything you learn from it is helpful.
Very good.
And always find a job that you're going to be happy in. Because if you're not happy at what you're doing on your job, you can make other people around you a little bit miserable.
Sure.
So be happy, because you're going to be you're going to be working your whole life. So be happy with whatever you do.
I heard a stat that of all Americans, something like 38% of Americans hate their job, and another 30% don't like it, but go just for the paycheck. And only, I think it's about 15% of Americans love their job and really feel, fulfilled in the work and are happy with it. And I think I can say I feel like teaching was a great fit for me. I love being here talking to you guys and working with these students. So I think that's solid advice. Be in that 15%. Find a way to do something that you're passionate about and can pay your bills and be happy with what you do.
Yeah, I was actually 15 when I decided what I wanted to do. I was, like say, in school we had a mechanic shop. This is what I want to do for my life, and that's what I did from the time I was 15 years old. I went to work for General Motors, and I worked there for 31 years. I did all kinds of different jobs within General Motors, within engineering, and I was always happy with everything I did, because it was just cool things that I did.
That's great. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you for answering our questions. I really appreciate you coming in today and sharing your experiences and some wisdom with these high school students. So much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.